You never forget your first night shift, when the whole world is asleep and all you have for company are shadows and the steady hum of fluorescent lights. You start to understand what it really means to be alone. But sometimes the night isn't empty. Sometimes something stares back. These are the stories of security guards who learned that, in the darkness, not everything is as it seems. Each story is told from the guard's perspective, an entry into a world where horror is part of the job description. If you think the night shift is easy, listen closely. Story 1. Security guard horror. Camera 6 showed someone staring at me. My name is Tyler, and for nearly a decade, I've worked as a night shift security guard. My job is simple on paper. Watch the monitors, check the doors, keep things safe. Most nights, nothing happens. I drink coffee that tastes like burnt rubber, listen to the hum of fluorescent lights, and count the hours until the sun peaks over the horizon. But there was one night that changed how I saw my job forever. A night when the shadows in the corner of my eye became more than just tricks of the light. A night when I understood what it really meant to be watched. I remember that evening perfectly, as if my brain can't let it fade away. The world outside was painted in the burnt orange of a late autumn sunset. I arrived at the building, an unremarkable office complex at the edge of town, the kind of place that feels empty even when it's full. My footsteps echoed in the parking garage as I made my way to the back entrance. My breath formed clouds in the cold air. I buzzed myself in, the heavy steel door thudding behind me. There's a ritual to settling in for a shift like mine. I clock in, double-check the log for any notes from the previous shift, and pour myself a cup of whatever sludge passes for coffee that night. I make the first round, walking the halls with my maglite, checking that all the doors are secure, windows shut, alarms set. The building was silent, save for the distant hum of servers in the IT room and the occasional snap of the old heating system kicking on. The silence was so complete, I could hear the ticking of my own wristwatch. After the first round, I settle into the security office, a windowless bunker with concrete walls and a battered steel desk. The monitors line the wall, 12 screens, each showing a grainy, black and white feed from somewhere in the building. Most of the time, the screens are an endless parade of empty hallways, deserted stairwells, and closed office doors. Occasionally, a mouse scurries across the break room floor, or a moth flutters near a light fixture. I keep an incident log open, jotting down anything remotely unusual. Camera 6 always bothered me. It faced the far end of the south corridor, where the motion sensor lights never seemed to work right. Even after maintenance replaced the bulbs and sensors, the lights would flicker, sometimes staying off entirely. The camera's feed would stutter, showing a few seconds of static before snapping back to the empty hallway. I'd reported it before, but but nobody ever found a real problem. That night, I was halfway through my second cup of coffee, the bitter taste lingering on my tongue, when I noticed something was off. I can't say what drew my eyes to camera 6. Maybe it was the way the static seemed to last a little longer than usual, or maybe it was a subtle shift in the shadows near the end of the hall. I leaned forward, squinting at the monitor. At the very edge of the frame, someone was standing there. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a reflection maybe, or a shadow cast by something out of sight. But the figure was unmistakably human. Tall, thin, and perfectly still. I couldn't make out the face, but the figure was pale, almost gray, with long, tangled hair falling over their features. They stood just outside the glow of the emergency exit sign, arms at their sides, staring straight at the camera. My heart thudded in my chest. For a few moments, I just watched, waiting for the figure to move, to reveal itself as a coworker playing a prank, or a trespasser caught in the wrong place. But the figure didn't move, didn't blink, just stared, unblinking, into the camera. I reached for the radio, thumb hovering over the button to call building maintenance or even the police, but I hesitated. What would I say? There's someone staring at the camera in a hallway that's supposed to be empty. No, I don't know who it is. No, they're not moving. I could already hear the skepticism in their voices. I forced myself to look away, checked the other monitors. Every other hallway was empty. The break room was deserted. The lobby, the stairwells, the loading dock, all clear. I switched back to camera 6. The figure was closer now, just a few feet from the lens. Face was still hidden, but I could make out the outline of their shoulders, the strange, jerky tilt of their head. A chill ran down my spine, the kind that settles deep into your bones, making your skin crawl. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the camera was glitching, replaying old footage. Maybe a reflection from a cleaning cart or some other mundane explanation. But the longer I watched, the more certain I became that someone was there, right now, watching me. I stood up, grabbed my flashlight, and clipped my radio to my belt. My hands shook as I keyed in the code for the south corridor door. The hallway was darker than usual, the overhead lights stubbornly refusing to turn on. My footsteps echoed, each one impossibly loud in the silence. As I walked, I scanned the shadows, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The corridor was empty. I swept my flashlight from side to side, illuminating the scuffed linoleum and the faded directory signs on the wall. Nothing. No sign of anyone. I reached the spot where the figure had stood. The air felt colder here, as if the temperature had dropped 10 degrees. I spun around, half expecting to find someone behind me, but the hallway remained empty. My breath fogged in the beam of my flashlight. I lingered for a moment, trying to shake the feeling of being watched. The silence pressed in from all sides, thick and oppressive. I forced myself to keep moving, to finish the round and return to the safety of the security office. back at my desk, I checked camera 6 again. The figure was gone. The hallway was as empty as when I'd started my shift. I let out a shaky breath, telling myself it was all in my head, maybe a delayed video feed, a trick of the light, a hallucination brought on by too much caffeine and too little sleep. But something compelled me to rewind the footage to see if I could catch another glimpse of the figure. I scrubbed back through the recording, watching the empty hallway, the flicker of the lights, the occasional burst of static. Then, for a split second, the figure's face flashed on the screen, pale, sunken eyes staring directly into the lens. The image was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by static. I froze, heart hammering. I replayed the footage, frame by frame, but the face never appeared again. It was as if the recording itself was haunted, the evidence erased by something I couldn't understand. For the rest of the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. Every time I looked at camera 6, I half expected to see that face again, lurking in the shadows. The other cameras offered no comfort, just more empty hallways, more silence. I tried to distract myself, reading old incident reports and scrolling through my phone, but my eyes kept drifting back to the monitors. The hours dragged, each minute stretched out by the weight of anticipation. At 3 a.m, I heard a faint tapping sound. At first, I thought it was coming from the hallway, but it was too rhythmic, too deliberate. I muted the monitors, listening intently. The tapping continued, soft and insistent, like fingernails drumming on glass. I stood up, flashlight in hand, and stepped into the hallway. The sound grew louder, echoing off the walls. I followed it to the supply closet near camera 6's corridor. The door was closed, but the tapping continued inside. I hesitated, then opened the door. The closet was empty, save for a few mop buckets and cleaning supplies. The tapping stopped. I searched every inch, but found nothing out of the ordinary. When I returned to the office, camera 6 was filled with static. For a moment, the figure's face appeared again, closer than before, pressed against the glass. I blinked, and the image vanished. The rest of the shift passed in a haze of anxiety and exhaustion. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound felt like a warning. When dawn finally broke, the building filled with the soft light of morning, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. I packed my things, left a note for the next shift, and hurried out to the parking lot. As I started my car, I glanced back at the building. In the window near camera 6's corridor, I thought I saw a pale face watching me leave. I never spoke about that night to anyone. Not my supervisor, not my coworkers, not even my family. But every time I work the night shift now, I keep one eye on the monitors, especially camera 6. And when the lights flicker or the feed turns to static, I remember the feeling of being watched by something that shouldn't exist. Sometimes I wonder if I ever really left that hallway, if part part of me is still there, trapped in the glow of the monitor, staring back at the next unlucky guard. Story 2. Security Guard Horror. I heard children in the closed theater. People always ask if the night shift is boring. I wish it was. There is something about empty spaces at night that makes every sound seem louder, every shadow seem longer. I was working security at an old theater, one of those grand places with velvet seats and gold trim, the kind that had seen better days, the kind where you could almost hear the ghosts of applause in the rafters. I'll never forget my first shift there. The building was a relic. Towers of stone, ornate columns, staircases that spiraled upward into darkness. The posters in the lobby had faded with time, their colors washed out by years of sunlight. Every surface seemed to hold a memory, every echo a story. My footsteps on the marble floor sounded like gunshots. The air carried the scent of old wood, dust, and something faintly sweet, maybe the lingering ghost of popcorn. The theater had been shut down for months. No shows, no rehearsals, not a soul inside except for me. My job was simple: walk the rounds, check that no squatters or vandals made their way in, and report anything out of place. The staff had all been let go, from the ticket attendants to the janitors. Even the cleaning crew only came once a week, and always during daylight. My first night was uneventful. I walked the halls, passed through the dressing rooms and backstage, and sat in the box office pretending to read a paperback I'd brought from home. But on my second night, something changed. Something I still can't explain. It was just after midnight, the hour when the world seems to hold its breath. I was sitting in the lobby, watching the dust motes float in the moonlight, when I heard it, the sound of children laughing. At first, I thought it was my imagination, maybe the pipes, maybe the wind, maybe an old recording echoing through the ducts. But the laughter grew louder, rising and falling in waves, echoing from the main theater itself. I froze. The theater was locked. I was certain I had checked every door and window, that no one could have slipped inside without me noticing. The laughter echoed again, bouncing off the marble, playful and bright. I stood, heart pounding, and walked toward the heavy double doors that led to the auditorium. The laughter stopped as soon as I touched the handle. The silence was absolute. I hesitated, then pushed the door open. Inside, the air was cold and heavy, thick with the smell of velvet and old curtains. My flashlight beam wavered as I swept it across the empty seats, their plush cushions faded and covered in a layer of dust. The silence pressed in on me, making my own breaths sound too loud. I called out, my voice echoing in the vastness. "Is anyone there?" My words disappeared into the darkness. No answer. I moved slowly down the central aisle, my footsteps muffled by the carpet. The stage loomed ahead, its curtains drawn, the orchestra pit yawning like a mouth. As I reached the front row, I heard a faint rustling above me, a whisper of movement in the high balconies. I aimed my flashlight upward, the beam slicing through the darkness. Shadows danced along the ornate carvings and gold leaf. I saw nothing, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. My skin prickled. I told myself it was just nerves, just the building settling, but I couldn't shake the sensation that eyes were following me, hidden in the gloom. I climbed the steps to the balcony, the wooden stairs groaning under my weight. At the top, I paused, listening. Again, the laughter. This time it was closer, right behind me. I spun around, but the row was empty. The laughter faded, replaced by the creak of a seat being lowered, then silence. I checked every row, every aisle, every corner of the balcony. Nothing. No footprints, no signs of intrusion. I shone my light over the seats, searching for anything out of place. In the last row, I found a small, worn-out toy car, its paint chipped, its wheels warped by time. It looked old, older than I was, maybe left behind by a child decades ago. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands, feeling the weight of its history. I tried to convince myself that the laughter had been in my head, that the toy was nothing more than a relic, a forgotten piece of the past. But as I placed it on the armrest and turned to leave, I heard the laughter again, this time, right next to my ear. I spun, heart hammering, but saw only shadows. I descended the stairs, feeling the weight of the darkness pressing down on me. Backstage, the silence was even thicker. Old costumes hung from racks, their colors muted by dust. Mirrors lined the walls, their surfaces clouded, reflecting warped versions of myself. I walked past dressing rooms, peeking inside. One door was ajar, and inside I saw a message scrawled on the wall in faded red. "Play with us." I felt a chill, the kind that seeps into your bones. I backed away, closing the door gently, my hands trembling. The laughter started up again, softer now, like it was coming from the rafters. I looked up and saw nothing but darkness. The building moaned as if in pain, the old pipes rattling. I checked the stage, the wings, the orchestra pit, nothing. The only sound was my own breathing, ragged and fast. At one point, my flashlight flickered and died. I was plunged into darkness, the silence broken only by the distant echo of giggles. I fumbled for my phone, using its weak light to guide me back to the lobby. I locked the doors behind me, heart still racing. I tried to tell myself it was all just the building, memories trapped in the walls, sounds carried by the wind. But the laughter lingered in my ears long after my shift ended. I went home that morning as the sky turned gray, sleep eluding me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me out, that the laughter was waiting for me just beyond the edge of consciousness. The next night, I returned to the theater, determined to prove to myself that it had all been in my head. I started my rounds earlier, double-checking every door and window, making sure the building was sealed tight. I carried a new flashlight, extra batteries, and my radio set to the maintenance channel. The night was quieter, the air heavy with expectation. I sat in the box office reading, but I couldn't focus. Every creak of the building made me jump. Every distant sound set my teeth on edge. At midnight, the laughter returned. This time, it sounded different, less playful, more insistent. I stood, heart pounding, and followed the sound to the main theater doors. I pushed them open, stepping into the darkness. The laughter echoed all around me, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. I scanned the seats, the balcony, the wings. My flashlight caught something moving near the stage, a flicker of white, like a child's dress. I hurried down the aisle, my footsteps swallowed by the thick carpet. On the stage, I found a single, dusty ballet slipper. It looked impossibly small, as if it belonged to a child. I bent down, examining it, and heard footsteps running across the stage behind me. I spun around, but the boards were empty. I stood, calling out, "Who's there?" My voice echoed, answered only by silence. Then, from the darkness above, a child's voice whispered, "Play with us." I shivered, the words chilling me to the core. I backed away, nearly tripping over a loose floorboard. The laughter rose again, filling the theater, swirling around me like a storm. I fled the stage, heart in my throat, and locked myself in the box office. I called my supervisor, but the line was dead. I tried the maintenance radio, but all I heard was static. I waited, listening to the laughter, until the first light of morning crept through the lobby windows. When I finally stepped outside, the world felt sharper, more real. The laughter faded, replaced by the ordinary sounds of city life. I told myself I'd imagined it all, that the theater was just playing tricks on me. But the next night, the laughter returned, and every night after that. I started to see things out of the corner of my eye, shadows darting across the balcony, a flash of white near the stage, a row of seats rocking as if someone had just stood up. I found toys in strange places, a spinning top in the orchestra pit, a doll's head in the dressing room, marbles scattered across the lobby floor. I tried to ignore it, to focus on my rounds, but the laughter never stopped. It followed me through the halls, growing louder when I was alone. Sometimes I heard it in the bathrooms, echoing off the tile, or in the stairwells, bouncing from wall to wall. One night, I decided to set up my phone to record. I left it on the stage, camera pointed at the seats, and made my rounds. When I came back, the phone was gone. I found it hours later in the lost and found box, the battery dead. When I charged it and watched the footage, I saw nothing at first, just the empty theater, the seats, the stage. Then, at exactly midnight, the screen flickered and the laughter began. The camera panned slowly, as if held by invisible hands, moving across the seats. For a split second, a child's face appeared in the lens, smiling, eyes wide, mouth open in laughter. The image froze, then the phone went dark. I deleted the footage, but it didn't help. The laughter only grew louder, more insistent. I started to dread my shifts, counting the hours until sunrise. I avoided the stage, the balcony, the dressing rooms. I stuck to the lobby, lights blazing, doors locked. But the laughter always found me. One night, I heard footsteps running in the hallway outside the box office. I opened the door, flashlight in hand, but the hall was empty. The footsteps continued, circling me faster and faster. The laughter followed, rising to a fever pitch. I slammed the door shut, heart pounding, and pressed my back against it. The footsteps stopped. The laughter faded. I waited, breathless, until dawn. After that, I started seeing things during the day. Shadows flitting across my vision, flashes of white in the corners of rooms, toys appearing in places I knew I hadn't left them. The laughter echoed in my mind, even when I was awake. I told my supervisor I couldn't work there anymore. I made up a story about family obligations, needing to move out of town. He accepted my resignation without question. Maybe he'd heard the laughter, too. On my last night, I walked the theater one final time. The air was heavy, thick with memories. I stood on the stage, looking out at the empty seats, and whispered, "I can't play with you. I'm sorry." The laughter echoed, softer now, almost sad. I left the theater, locking the doors behind me. As I walked away, I heard the laughter one last time, fading into the night. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still hear it. And I wonder what happened in that theater before it was closed. I wonder if the night ever truly ends, or if the laughter just waits for the next lonely soul to walk through those doors. Story 3. Security Guard Horror. The basement door opened at 4 a.m. There are places in every building where the light never quite reaches. Places where the air feels colder, where the echoes last just a little too long, where the walls seem to lean in, listening. Every security guard knows about these places, though we rarely talk about them. In the building where I worked, the kind of squat, sprawling office that looks the same in every city, it was the basement. The building wasn't old exactly, but it had a way of making you feel like it had always been there. The floors above ground were nothing special. Cubicles, break rooms, conference rooms with stains from 1,000 spilled coffees. But the basement was another world. The walls were poured concrete, the ceilings low, pipes and wires exposed overhead. It was a labyrinth of storage rooms, utility closets, and forgotten corners that never seemed to make it onto any blueprint. When I first started working there, my supervisor gave me the same advice he'd gotten when he was new. Don't go into the basement unless you have to. And if you do, don't stay down there longer than you need. He grinned, but his eyes were serious. I laughed it off. I was young, still thought I knew everything. I learned quickly that some warnings are best heeded. Most nights, nothing happened. I'd make my rounds, check that the exterior doors were locked, wander up and down the empty corridors. The building had its own rhythm. The tick of the exit signs, the soft whir of the HVAC, the occasional clatter of a loose vent cover. I'd stop by the vending machine, grab a bag of stale chips, and return to the security office to watch the monitors. 12 feeds of empty halls and locked doors. But one night, everything changed. I remember it was cold outside, the kind of cold that makes your teeth ache. My shift started at 10, and by midnight, the whole building seemed to exhale, settling into silence. The monitors flickered, a dance of black and white static, but nothing moved. I passed the time by reading, jotting down notes in the incident log, and sipping bitter coffee from a chipped mug. At around 4 in the morning, the building changed. I can't describe it any other way. The air felt heavier, the shadows deeper. The hum of the lights seemed louder, almost angry. I tried to shake off the feeling, blaming it on lack of sleep. That's when I heard it, a faint click, barely audible over the drone of the air conditioning. I looked up at the monitors and saw nothing out of the ordinary. But the sound came again, a metallic creak. I realized, with a sinking feeling, that it was the latch on the basement door. I stood, every inch of me on edge. The basement door was at the end of a long corridor, painted a dull gray, with a battered sign that read "Authorized personnel only." I left the security office, my flashlight heavy in my hand, and walked down the hallway. The air grew colder with each step. When I turned the corner, I saw the basement door swinging open, slow and silent. The light inside flickered, casting long, lurching shadows down the stairs. I paused, heart pounding. I called out, my voice sounding thin and shaky in the emptiness. "Hello, is someone down there?" No answer, only the echo of my words bouncing back. I should have called for backup. I should have radioed the building manager or even the police. But curiosity, foolish, stubborn curiosity, got the better of me. I stepped inside, the door creaking as it opened wider. The stairwell was steep, the concrete steps slick with condensation. I gripped the handrail, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The walls were stained with watermarks, old graffiti barely visible beneath layers of paint. At the bottom of the stairs, the basement spread out in every direction. Corridors branched off into darkness, doors half open or missing entirely. The air was colder here, thick with the smell of damp and dust. My breath hung in the beam of my flashlight. I started down the main corridor, calling out again. "Is anyone there?" My voice was swallowed by the darkness. I checked the first few rooms, storage spaces filled with old office chairs, broken desks, boxes of paper. Nothing out of place. But as I moved deeper, I noticed something odd, footprints in the dust. Small, bare footprints, weaving between the puddles on the floor. They led toward the far end of the basement, to a door I'd never seen open before. The door was painted red, its surface chipped and scarred. It hung slightly ajar, a faint light spilling from the gap. I approached, every instinct telling me to turn back, to leave well enough alone. But I couldn't. I had to know. I pushed the door open, the hinges squealing in protest. Inside was a small room the walls covered in peeling wallpaper, the floor littered with scraps of paper and broken toys. In the center of the room stood a child's rocking horse, its paint faded, one eye missing. The horse rocked slowly back and forth, creaking with each movement. I felt a chill so deep it hurt. The rocking horse kept moving, though there was no breeze, no reason for it to be in motion. I stepped closer, the floorboards groaning under my weight. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, banging my fist against the wood, but it wouldn't budge. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in. The light flickered and went out. I was alone in the dark, the sound of the rocking horse echoing in my ears. I stood frozen, every muscle locked. My flashlight sputtered, casting wild, jumping shadows on the walls. In the darkness, I thought I saw movement, a small shape darting from corner to corner. I called out again, my voice cracking. "Who's there?" No answer, just the creak of the rocking horse. I groped along the wall, searching for the door. My fingers brushed something cold and smooth, a mirror, its surface icy to the touch. I shone my light on it, and for a split second, I saw a face staring back at me. Not my own, a child's face, pale and hollow-eyed, mouth twisted in a silent scream. I staggered back, heart hammering, and tripped over a pile of toys. The flashlight slipped from my hand, spinning across the floor. In the brief moments of darkness, I heard whispering, soft and urgent, voices layered on top of each other. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was pleading, desperate. I crawled toward the flashlight, grabbing it with trembling hands. When I turned it on, the room was empty. The rocking horse was still, the mirror reflecting only my own terrified face. I tried the door again. This time, it opened easily, swinging outward with a groan. I stumbled into the corridor, gasping for air. The basement was silent, the air thick with the smell of dust and old metal. I made my way back to the stairs, every step an eternity. The lights flickered as I climbed, chasing me up the steps. I slammed the basement door behind me, locking it tight. I stood in the hallway, heart racing, sweat freezing on my skin. Back in the security office, I tried to collect myself. I checked the monitors, but the basement feed was nothing but static. I replayed the footage, frame by frame, but saw only darkness and the occasional flicker of movement at the edge of the screen. I made a note in the incident log. Basement door opened at 4 a.m. Possible trespasser. Investigated. Found nothing. That was all I could bring myself to write. The rest of the shift passed in a haze. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow seemed to move. When the sun finally rose, I left the building without looking back. But the basement stayed with me. I dreamed about it, cold, endless corridors, doors that led nowhere, the rocking horse creaking in the dark. Sometimes I'd wake in the middle of the night, sure I'd heard whispering from beneath the floor. I tried to forget, but the memory clung to me. I started avoiding the basement, making excuses to stay above ground. If I had to go down, I did it quickly, never lingering. The other guards noticed, but no one said anything. Maybe they understood. A few weeks later, I found a note taped to my locker. It was a scrap of paper, torn from a child's notebook. On it, in shaky handwriting, were the words, "Don't go back." I never found out who left it. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe someone else had seen what I'd seen. I transferred to a different site a month later, trading the silence of the basement for the noisy chaos of a warehouse. But I never forgot that night. Sometimes, when I'm alone in a quiet building, I hear the creak of a rocking horse, the whisper of voices begging not to be left behind. And I wonder how many doors are better left unopened. Story 4. Security guard horror. The empty mall wasn't empty. If you've ever been in a mall after midnight, you know there's a strange kind of magic to it. The stores are dark, the escalators are silent, and every sound echoes as if the whole place is holding its breath. I used to think working the night shift at the mall would be easy money. Just a few hours of walking empty corridors, checking locked doors, and staring at security monitors. I thought wrong. The mall where I worked wasn't anything special. It had the usual collection of stores, shoe outlets, a big department store on each end, a food court that always smelled like stale fries, and a sunken fountain in the center that hadn't worked in years. During the day, the place was alive with noise and color, but at night, it became something else, something quieter and somehow older, like the bones of the building were showing. My first weeks on the job were uneventful. I'd arrive just before closing, check in with the evening staff, and start my rounds once the last shoppers had left. The cleaning crew worked quickly, sweeping up spilled popcorn and mopping the food court. By midnight, the only people left were me and my partner Dave, who had a habit of stretching his lunch breaks into hour-long naps in the staff lounge. Our office was tucked away behind the arcade. It was a cramped space filled with grainy monitors and the constant hum of old electronics. I'd spend most of my time in there, watching the feeds from the security cameras, sipping coffee that tasted like cardboard, and listening to the clock tick. When the boredom got to be too much, I'd do another lap of the mall, making sure the doors were still locked and everything was where it was supposed to be. But after a while, I started to notice things. Small things at first. A chair in the food court would be moved when I knew I'd left it tucked under the table. A store display would be knocked over, even though nobody had been in the building for hours. Sometimes, the lights in the toy store would flicker on for a few seconds, then go dark again. I blamed it on the cleaning crew, or maybe a power surge. But the more it happened, the harder it was to ignore. One night, just after 2 a.m., I was watching the monitors when I saw movement on the second floor balcony. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. But then the shape moved again, quick, almost skittish, and I realized it was a person. They darted behind a pillar near the old bookstore and disappeared from view. I radioed Dave, but he didn't answer. Probably asleep again. I grabbed my flashlight and headed for the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. The air was cool and still, with the faint smell of lemon cleaner lingering in the air. On the balcony, I found a single shoe, a child's sneaker, caked with dirt. Next to it, a trail of wet footprints led toward the fountain in the center of the mall. My skin prickled. The fountain hadn't worked in years, but tonight, water was trickling into the basin, shimmering in the pale overhead light. I followed the footprints, my heart thudding in my chest. As I reached the fountain, the air grew colder. I could hear whispering, low and urgent, coming from the shadows behind the benches that ringed the fountain. I called out, my voice sounding too loud. The whispering stopped. Suddenly, the mall's lights flickered and went out, plunging me into darkness. My flashlight sputtered, barely illuminating the ground in front of me. I backed away slowly, every instinct screaming at me to run. But something brushed past my leg, cold and damp, like a wet hand. I spun around, shining my light in every direction, but saw nothing. I ran for the security office, my footsteps echoing behind me, chased by a fear I couldn't explain. When I reached the office, I slammed the door and locked it. I watched the monitors, breathless. On every screen, the same shadow darted from corner to corner, always just out of sight. I pressed the radio, calling for Dave, but there was only static. The hours crawled by. At some point, the lights flickered back on, and the shadows melted away. When the sun finally rose, I checked the balcony again. The shoe and the footprints were gone. The fountain was dry. I told myself it had all been a dream, a product of too much caffeine and not enough sleep. But the next night, it started again. This time, it was a soft humming, drifting down from the third-floor skylight. A child's lullaby, sung in a voice so sweet and clear that it made my hair stand on end. I followed the sound, flashlight trembling in my hand, but every time I thought I was getting closer, it would move down the escalator into the food court, hiding behind a locked gate. I saw shapes moving in the shadows, too small to be adults, too fast to be real. I found toys scattered on the floor, marbles rolling in slow circles near the empty fountain. Once, I heard giggling from inside the locked toy store, but when I checked the doors, they were still secured. I started to dread my shifts. I drank more coffee, tried to stay awake, but sleep became impossible. I saw things in my dreams, faces pressed against the glass, hands reaching out from beneath the fountain, eyes blinking in the darkness of the food court. One night, I decided to set up a camera of my own. I placed it on the balcony, pointed at the fountain, and left it running. When I reviewed the footage, I saw nothing at first, just the slow sweep of the cleaning crew, the flicker of the hallway lights. But at 3:13 a.m., the camera picked up movement. A small figure, no bigger than a child, crawling out of the fountain basin. It looked around, then vanished into the shadows. I showed the footage to Dave. He laughed, said it was a trick of the light, maybe a raccoon that had gotten inside. But I knew better. The next night, I heard footsteps running down the hallway. I followed them, my heart in my throat. But every time I turned a corner, I found nothing but empty corridors and locked doors. The mall seemed to twist around me, the halls longer than I remembered, the exits farther away. Once I found myself back at the fountain without remembering how I'd gotten there. The water was running again, swirling in slow circles. I reached in, searching for the drain, but my hand closed on something cold and slimy. I yanked my hand out, heart pounding, but there was nothing there. Just the slow drip of water and the echo of laughter fading into the distance. I started seeing things on the monitors, faces in the windows, shadows standing behind the mannequins in the department store, eyes blinking from the dark corners of the food court. I told myself it was stress, that I was seeing patterns where there were none. But the fear wouldn't go away. One night, I found Dave standing in the middle of the mall, staring at the fountain. His face was pale, his eyes wide. "Do you hear it?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Hear what?" I replied, though I already knew. "Singing," he said, his voice trembling. "It's coming from the walls." We stood there, listening to the faint melody drifting through the air. I felt cold all over, as if the song was seeping into my bones. After that, Dave stopped coming to work. He didn't quit, didn't call in sick, he just vanished. The supervisor said he'd probably found a better job, but I knew better. I started doing the rounds alone. The mall felt different, darker, emptier, as if the shadows were growing. The singing got louder, the laughter more insistent. I heard footsteps running behind me, whispers in my ear, the sound of something crawling through the air vents. I tried to quit, but the supervisor begged me to stay. "Just a few more weeks," he said. "We're understaffed. You're our best guy." So I stayed, counting the days, the hours, the minutes until my last shift. On my final night, the mall was silent. No laughter, no singing, no movement on the monitors. I walked the halls one last time, flashlight in hand, heart pounding. As I passed the fountain, I saw a small hand reach out of the water, pale and delicate, beckoning me closer. I froze, unable to move as the hand withdrew, pulling something dark and shapeless back into the water. I ran, not stopping until I was outside, breathing in the cold night air. I never went back. Sometimes, when I drive past the mall, I see shadows moving behind the glass, hear laughter echoing in the empty corridors. And I wonder if the mall was ever truly empty, or if something was waiting there all along, hidden in the darkness, just out of sight. Story 5. Security Guard Horror. The night shift never ends. There's a rhythm to night shifts that seeps into your bones. After a while, your body learns to ignore the clock. Your mind adjusts to the endless dark. The world outside fades, and all that matters is the building, the monitors, and the ticking of your own heartbeat. I thought I understood the routine. I thought I was used to the silence, the stillness, the loneliness. But then came the night that refused to let go, the night shift that never seemed to end. My name is Mark. I started working security right out of high school. I liked the solitude, the sense of control that came from having a whole building to myself. I'd worked in warehouses, office parks, even a university library once. The job was always the same: walk the rounds, watch the monitors, make sure nothing out of place stayed that way for long. I'd seen weird things, of course. Everyone who works nights has stories. Shadows moving on their own, strange faces reflected in glass, voices whispering in empty rooms. But nothing ever stuck with me the way this shift did. It started out as an ordinary night. I clocked in at 10 p.m. as usual. The building was a squat, concrete rectangle on the edge of the city, surrounded by empty parking lots and silent streets. I parked beneath a flickering streetlight, grabbed my duffel bag, and made my way to the front entrance. The air felt colder than usual, the wind biting through my jacket. Inside, the lobby was dimly lit, the vending machines humming quietly in the corner. I signed the logbook, checked the notes from the day shift, and poured myself a cup of stale coffee from the pot in the break room. My first round was uneventful. Offices all locked, fire exits secure. No sign of trouble in any of the storage rooms. I wrote a quick note in the log: all clear, 11:00 p.m., and settled in at the security desk. The monitors showed their usual parade of empty hallways, deserted stairwells, and locked doors. I watched for a while, letting my mind drift. At midnight, I stood and stretched, ready to make another round. That's when I noticed it. The clock on the wall read 12:00. My watch said the same. Even my phone, plugged in to charge, blinked midnight. I frowned, thinking there must be a power glitch, but the lights were steady, the computers still running. I shrugged it off and did my round. The building was silent, quieter than usual. My footsteps echoed on the tile, and the air felt heavy, like a storm was coming. I checked every door, every window, but found nothing out of place. When I got back to the desk, the clock still said midnight. So did my watch. So did my phone. I tried to reset the clock, but the hands refused to move. My phone wouldn't respond, stuck on the lock screen. I unplugged it and restarted it, but it blinked to life, still showing 12:00. I felt a chill run through me. I turned on the radio and tried to call the supervisor, but all I got was static. I tried the landline, nothing but a low hum. I sat in silence, staring at the monitors. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. The clock never changed. The night outside remained dark. No hint of sunrise on the horizon. I tried to read, but the words blurred together. I listened for the cleaning crew, but heard nothing. The The world outside the building seemed to have vanished. Every so often, I'd get up and do another round. The building felt wrong. The shadows seemed deeper, the silence heavier. I thought I saw movement in the corner of my eye, a flicker of motion at the end of the hallway, a shadow slipping around a corner. But whenever I turned to look, there was nothing. I started to feel trapped, as if the building was shrinking around me. The air grew colder, my breath fogging in the light from my flashlight. The monitors flickered, showing static for a moment before returning to their usual feeds. I tried the doors, but they wouldn't budge. Even the emergency exits, which should have opened easily, felt welded shut. I pounded on the glass, shouted for help, but my voice seemed to vanish into the darkness. I lost track of time. Every time I checked the clock, still midnight. My stomach ached with hunger, but the vending machines refused to work. My coffee turned cold, my water bottle emptied. I started to panic. I tried breaking a window, but the glass wouldn't crack. I tried the phone again, still nothing but static. I sat at the desk, head in my hands, trying to make sense of it all. I must have fallen asleep because I woke with a start to the sound of footsteps echoing down the hallway. I stood, heart pounding, and grabbed my flashlight. The footsteps grew louder, closer. I called out, "Who's there?" but got no answer. The footsteps stopped just outside the security office. I held my breath, waiting. The door creaked open, but the hallway was empty. I stepped outside, shining my light in every direction. The corridor stretched on forever, the walls seeming to bend and twist in the darkness. I walked for what felt like hours, but no matter which way I turned, I always ended up back at the security office. I started seeing things on the monitors, faces pressed against the glass, shadows moving through the empty rooms, eyes blinking in the darkness. I rubbed my eyes, convinced I was hallucinating, but the images remained. At some point, I saw myself on the monitors, sitting at the desk, head in my hands, just as I was. But the figure on the screen looked older, thinner, haunted. I tried to write in the logbook, but the pen wouldn't move. The pages were blank. I lost count of how many times I made my rounds, how many times I checked the clock. Always midnight, always darkness outside. I started to forget things, my name, the layout of the building, what day it was. The only constant was the clock, stuck at midnight, and the monitors, always watching. I saw other figures in the building, shadows moving through the corridors, voices whispering my name. I tried to follow them, to catch up, but they always slipped away, just out of reach. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I dreamed of endless hallways, doors that led nowhere, faces staring at me from the darkness. I stopped trying to escape. I sat at the desk, watching the monitors, waiting for something, anything, to change. Sometimes I heard laughter or crying, or the sound of footsteps running down the hall. Sometimes I saw my own reflection in the glass, but it didn't move when I did. I started to wonder if I'd ever really left the building, or if I'd always been here, trapped in the night shift that never ends. And then, one night, or maybe it was the same night, I heard a voice whisper in my ear. "You can leave," it said, "but you have to remember." I stood dizzy and walked to the front doors. This time, they opened easily. The world outside was silent, empty. I stepped out into the darkness, breathing in the cold air. When I looked back, the building was gone. Now, I work day shifts. I avoid empty buildings, avoid the dark. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see the monitors, the clock stuck at midnight, the endless night stretching on, and I wonder if I'll ever really escape. Story 6. Security Guard Horror. The night shift security guard who found someone living in the walls. I have worked some strange jobs in my life, but nothing ever stuck with me like the old manufacturing plant on the outskirts of town. It's the kind of place people drive past without a second glance. A long, low slab of concrete and steel, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire, half the windows covered in grime, the paint peeling from the doors. Most nights, my job as a night shift security guard was routine. I'd do a slow circuit of the property, check the perimeter, and settle into the security booth with a thermos of coffee and a paperback. But the longer I worked there, the more I realized this place had secrets hidden in the walls. It started with the noises. At first, I chalked it up to the building settling, or maybe rats in the ducts. The plant was old, after all, and the maintenance crew was always behind on repairs, but the sounds grew stranger with time. Knocks and scrapes and shuffling in the walls, always just out of sync with my footsteps. One night, while making my rounds, I stopped outside the main production floor. The lights were off, but the emergency exit sign cast a sickly green glow over the machinery. As I stood there, listening, I heard a faint scratching coming from behind the drywall. It was rhythmic, 3 short scratches, then a pause, then 3 more. I pressed my ear to the wall, trying to pinpoint the source, but the sound seemed to move, crawling through the walls like a living thing. I radioed maintenance, but there was no answer. It was well past midnight, and most of them were home in bed. I told myself it could wait till morning, but my curiosity wouldn't let me leave it alone. The next night, the noises returned, louder than before. I followed them down a narrow hallway lined with storage rooms, the fluorescent lights overhead flickering as I passed. The scratching stopped outside the old supervisor's office, a cramped space that hadn't been used in years. The door was locked, but I had the master key. Inside, the air was stale and cold. The desk was covered in dust, papers scattered across the floor. I checked the walls for signs of damage, but found nothing. As I turned to leave, I heard a soft, high-pitched whimper from the vent near the floor. I dropped to my knees and shined my flashlight inside. The darkness swallowed the beam, but for a moment, I thought I saw something, two eyes, wide and unblinking, reflecting the light. I jerked back, heart pounding. I called out, "Is someone in there?" Silence. I stood, nerves jangling, and told myself it was just my imagination. But the noises persisted. Every night they grew bolder, running footsteps inside the walls, the sound of something dragging itself through the vents, whispers on the edge of hearing. I started to dread my shifts, dreading the moment the building would go quiet and the noises would begin. One night, I brought a crowbar and a screwdriver, determined to get to the bottom of it. I waited until the scratching started, then followed the sound to a section of wall near the break room. The drywall was thin, patched and repatched over the years. I pressed my hand against it and felt a vibration, something moving on the other side. With a deep breath, I wedged the crowbar into the seam and pried the panel loose. The drywall gave way with a puff of dust, revealing a narrow gap between the walls. The space was barely wide enough for a person to crawl through. But there, in the beam of my flashlight, I saw a nest of blankets, food wrappers, and old clothes. And then movement. A thin, dirty hand shot out, groping for the fallen panel. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the flashlight. A face appeared in the gap, gaunt and filthy, eyes wide with terror. For a split second, our eyes met. "Please," the person whispered, voice ragged and raw. "Don't tell anyone, please." I froze, unsure what to do. This was no ghost, no monster, just a person hiding in the walls. I stepped back, heart hammering. "Who are you?" I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. The figure retreated, vanishing into the darkness. I heard the scuffle of bare feet on the concrete, the rustle of blankets. I radioed my supervisor, voice shaking. "There's someone living in the walls." I found them near the break room. He was there in minutes, along with the police. We searched the crawl space, shining lights into every corner, but found nothing. The nest was empty, the person gone. Later, the police told me they never found anyone. Maybe he slipped out through the vents, or maybe he had been living in the walls for so long he knew every hiding place. They patched the hole, sealed the vents, and told me not to worry. But the noises never stopped. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear footsteps in the walls, whispers behind the drywall, the soft whimper of someone too afraid to show their face. I started seeing signs that someone was still there. A half-eaten sandwich left in the storage room, a blanket dragged into a corner, footprints in the dust. Once, I found a crudely drawn picture taped to my locker. It showed a stick figure standing outside a house, eyes wide, mouth open in a scream. I reported it all, but the supervisors stopped listening. "Probably just kids breaking in," they said. "Don't worry about it." But I knew better. The longer I worked there, the more obsessed I became. I started mapping the noises, keeping track of when and where they appeared. I marked the walls with chalk, traced the path of the hidden corridors. I found old blueprints in a filing cabinet, yellowed with age, showing crawl spaces and maintenance shafts that didn't appear on any recent plans. The plant was a maze, a warren of forgotten spaces. I began to wonder how many people might have lived and died inside its walls. One night, I heard singing, soft and tuneless, drifting through the vents. I followed it, heart pounding, until it faded into silence. I pressed my ear to the wall and heard a voice whispering words I couldn't understand. I started leaving food and water near the vents, hoping whoever was inside would take it. Sometimes it disappeared, sometimes it didn't. Once, I found a note in shaky handwriting. "Thank you." I never saw the person again, but I knew they were still there. The noises, the footprints, the drawings, they never stopped. Eventually, I transferred to another site. I couldn't take the strain, the feeling of being watched from behind the walls. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I hear the scratching, the whispers, the soft sound of someone living just out of sight. And I wonder how many walls hold secrets like that. How many people are hiding, waiting, watching, hoping not to be found. Story 7. Security guard horror. Security footage revealed what was hunting employees after dark. I've always said that working security is mostly about paying attention. You watch, you listen, you keep track of patterns, who comes and goes, what noises are normal, when lights turn on and off. You get to know the pulse of a building, the way its bones creak and settle at night. But that job at the corporate office park taught me that sometimes paying too much attention reveals things you wish you'd never seen. The complex was massive, 6 stories of glass and steel surrounded by a moat of parking lots and a fence topped with barbed wire. There were 3 security guards on rotation, but at night, it was almost always just me. The others preferred the day shift, with its endless deliveries and badge checks and lost visitors. I liked the solitude, or at least I thought I did. For the first 2 months, the job was easy. I'd make my rounds, main lobby, executive offices, IT server room, storage cages in the basement. The office was full of those little details that felt expensive for no reason. Water features in the lobby, abstract art on the walls, even a gym on the ground floor. At night, it was all shadows and silence. My only company was the endless loop of security camera footage, dozens of feeds, stacked on a bank of monitors in the control room. But then the complaints started. First, a janitor refused to clean the 3rd floor after dark. She said she kept hearing someone running up and down the hallway, heavy footsteps in the silence. A week later, an IT guy quit on the spot, said he'd seen something crawling along the ceiling in the server room. I tried to laugh it off, but there was something in his eyes, a terror I couldn't ignore. That's when I started paying closer attention to the footage. I'd always reviewed the tapes out of habit, but that week, I found myself sitting in front of the screens for hours, watching every corridor, every office, every shadow. The building was full of blind spots, corners the cameras couldn't quite reach, angles that left whole rooms in darkness. I started mapping them out, noting where the shadows gathered, where the lights flickered the most. It was on a Thursday night, just after 2 a.m., when I first saw it. The camera in the main corridor on the 4th floor flickered, fuzzing with static for a second. When the picture returned, there was a shape moving down the hallway. It was tall and thin, its limbs strangely long, its movements jerky and unnatural. I froze, watching as it glided from one office to the next, pausing at each door as if sniffing the air. The thing had no face, just a blank expanse where features should have been, and 2 points of dim, red light where eyes might be. Every few steps, it would stop, turn, and seem to stare directly into the camera. Each time it did, the feed would buzz with static, the lights in the corridor would flicker, and the air on my skin would prickle, as if the thing could somehow reach through the screen. I watched, heart pounding, as it melted into one of the blind spots, vanishing from view. I rewound the tape, watched it again, tried to convince myself that I was seeing things. But the shape was there, unmistakable. The next morning, I reported it to my supervisor. He watched the footage with a frown, then shrugged. "Just a glitch," he said. "Maybe a trick of the light. Don't worry about it." But I couldn't let it go. I started reviewing weeks of archived footage, searching for any sign of the thing. At first, I found nothing. But then, 2 weeks earlier, at the exact same time, 2:47 a.m., the shape appeared again, this time in the basement corridor. It moved the same way, pausing at each door, lingering in the blind spots. I started keeping a log, noting every appearance. Always after 2 a.m., always moving in the same pattern. And each time, something strange happened. A monitor would short out, a motion sensor would fail, a plant in the lobby would wither overnight. The next week, one of the other guards quit without notice. I never saw him again. The staff started whispering about the night shift, about things moving in the darkness. A few of them even asked to change to daytime hours. One night, I decided to confront it. I waited in the control room, eyes glued to the monitors, every muscle tensed. At 2:46, I watched the corridor on the 4th floor, breath shallow. Right on schedule, the shape appeared, gliding down the hall. I radioed the other guard, no answer. I stood, grabbing my flashlight and baton, and made my way to the elevator. The building was dead silent. The air felt thick, heavy with the scent of ozone. When I stepped onto the 4th floor, the lights overhead flickered, casting long, twisting shadows on the walls. I crept down the corridor, heart pounding. Every step felt harder than the last. The air grew colder, my breath fogging in front of me. I turned the corner and froze. The shape was there, standing at the end of the hall. It was taller than I'd realized, its arms hanging down almost to its knees. Its head was cocked at an unnatural angle, as if listening for a sound only it could hear. I raised my flashlight, but the beam fizzled out. The shape turned, the red points of its eyes locking onto mine. I felt something cold and sharp drive into my mind, a pressure, a weight, a flood of images I couldn't understand. I staggered back dizzy, and the shape glided toward me, silent as a shadow. I ran, feet pounding the tile, breath coming in ragged gasps. I made it to the stairwell, slammed the door behind me, and collapsed on the landing. The pressure in my head faded, replaced by a dull ache. When I looked back, the corridor was empty. I returned to the control room, shaking. I watched the monitors for the rest of the night, but the shape didn't appear again. The next morning, I called in sick. I spent the day in bed, blinds drawn, trying to forget the feeling of those eyes on me, but the nightmare started that night. I dreamed of endless corridors, doors that led nowhere, faces pressed against glass, eyes that burned in the darkness. I woke gasping, drenched in sweat. When I returned to work, I found a note on my desk. Don't look at the cameras after 2 a.m. I never found out who wrote it. I tried to ignore the footage, to focus on my rounds. But curiosity gnawed at me. I started catching glimpses of the shape in the corners of my eyes, in reflections in the glass, in the flicker of the monitors, in the shadows under my desk. I saw the effects too. Plants wilting overnight, electronics shorting out, the sense that something was always just behind me. I tried to warn the other guards, but they laughed it off, said I was seeing ghosts. One night, a janitor disappeared. She'd been cleaning the executive offices on the 4th floor. The police searched the building, but found nothing. No sign of struggle, no evidence she'd ever been there. Her cart was found in the hallway, supplies scattered as if she'd left in a hurry. I watched the footage from that night. At 2:47, the shape appeared in the corridor. The janitor's figure showed up a minute later. She paused, looked around, then vanished into one of the blind spots. The shape followed, and neither of them ever came out. I showed the footage to my supervisor again. He watched, silent, then quietly closed the laptop. "Don't mention this to anyone," he said. "It's not our problem." After that, I became obsessed. I mapped every blind spot, every flicker of static, every time the shape appeared. I tried to catch it on camera, tried to follow it on my rounds, but it always slipped away. I started seeing it outside the building, reflected in car windows, blinking in the shadows of the parking lot, lurking in the glow of streetlights. I stopped sleeping, stopped eating. My world shrank to the size of the monitors, the endless loop of footage, the hunt for a thing I could never quite catch. I don't know how much time passed. Weeks, maybe months. The building started to feel alive, the walls pulsing with some hidden heartbeat. The staff dwindled. The night shift grew shorter until I was the only one left. One night, I caught the shape staring straight into the camera, its eyes burning with a cold, red light. The monitor flickered, the lights went out, and the building was plunged into darkness. I heard footsteps behind me, soft, deliberate, getting closer. I turned, heart pounding, but saw only my own reflection in the glass. After that, I quit. I left the building, left the city, tried to rebuild my life. But sometimes, late at night, I see those red eyes in the darkness. I hear footsteps in the hallway, the buzz of static on the TV, the pressure in my head returning. And I wonder what's really watching, waiting, hunting in the places we think are safe. Story 8. Security Guard Horror. I worked security at an abandoned hospital. Then the elevators started moving. They say hospitals are never truly empty, even after the last patient has checked out and the lights are turned off for good. Working security at an abandoned hospital, I learned how true that is. Some places hold onto the memories of pain, hope, and fear, their very walls saturated with the echoes of what once was. When you're alone in a place like that, you hear things, you see things, and sometimes things happen that you can't explain. No matter how hard you try. I took the job because I needed the money. The hospital was set to be demolished in a few months, but in the meantime, someone had to keep out vandals, copper thieves, and thrill-seeking kids. The pay was good, and the supervisor assured me it was easy work. Just make your rounds, check the doors, call if you see anything weird. Place is dead as a tomb. He laughed. I didn't. The first night, I arrived at dusk. The building loomed against the sky, its windows dark, the parking lot overgrown with weeds. The main entrance was chained shut, but there was a side door for staff, secured with a badge lock. My footsteps echoed in the empty hallways as I walked in, flashlight in hand, the beam illuminating peeling paint and broken floor tiles. The air was thick with dust and the faint, metallic tang of something I couldn't name. My first rounds were uneventful. I walked the corridors, checked the locked wards, peered into the empty patient rooms. The furniture was gone, but the ghosts of the past lingered, faded murals of cartoon animals in the pediatrics wing, a forgotten teddy bear in the corner of the waiting room, charts still clipped to doors. I tried not to linger, but I couldn't help wondering about the people who had been there before, what they'd felt, what they'd left behind. The only place I really avoided was the basement. The supervisor said the lights didn't work down there, and the stairs were dangerous. Stay out unless you want to break your neck, he warned. I was happy to oblige. I set up shop in what had once been the admissions office, now just a bare desk, a battered chair, and a working landline connected to the outside world. I kept my radio on, scanned through static, and tried to read a book. But the silence was heavy, broken only by the distant creak of settling beams and the occasional scuttle of rats in the walls. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. I started my next round, moving through the shadowed corridors, flashlight slicing through the gloom. That's when I heard it, a soft chime echoing through the empty building. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but then it came again, unmistakable. The bell of an elevator arriving at a floor. I froze. The elevators were supposed to be disconnected. The power to most of the building was shut off, except for a few emergency lights and the admissions office. I followed the sound, my footsteps quickening, heart pounding. I found the main elevator in the central hall. The doors were open, the interior dark. As I watched, the lights above the door flickered to life. The doors closed with a metallic thud, and the elevator began to rise, the floor numbers lighting up one by one. It stopped at the third floor, paused, then descended again. When the doors opened, the elevator was empty. I stood there, breathless, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Maybe it was a glitch, I told myself. Maybe someone had left a circuit on by mistake. I checked the control room, but all the panels were off. No power to the elevators. No way they should have been working. I went back to the admissions office, trying to shake it off. But the elevator kept moving up and down, stopping at random floors, the bell chiming again and again. I started to dread the sound. Every time the bell rang, I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Sometimes, I'd catch a glimpse of movement in the elevator, a shadow, a flicker of white, a shape I couldn't quite identify. But every time I checked, the elevator was empty. I called the supervisor, but he laughed it off. Old buildings do weird things. Don't worry about it. But I couldn't stop worrying. The next night, it happened again. The elevator moved on its own, doors opening and closing, lights flickering. I tried to ignore it, but the sound followed me through the halls, growing louder, more insistent. I started seeing things, footprints in the dust, handprints on the glass, doors that opened and closed by themselves. Once, I found a patient chart on the floor, the name smudged, the date from years before. I began to wonder if I was alone. One night, I decided to ride the elevator, hoping to prove to myself that it was nothing, just a mechanical glitch. I stepped inside, pressed the button for the top floor. The doors slid shut with a shudder, and the elevator began to rise. The lights flickered, then went out. I stood in darkness, heart pounding, listening to the hum of the motor. The elevator stopped. The doors opened. I was on the third floor. The hallway stretched ahead, lined with empty rooms, the air colder than anywhere else in the building. I stepped out, flashlight trembling in my hand. Shadows clung to the corners, and the silence was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. I walked the corridor, checking the rooms. Most were empty, but in one I found a hospital bed, sheets rumpled as if someone had just left. A single slipper lay on the floor. I felt the urge to leave, but my feet wouldn't move. I heard footsteps behind me, soft, shuffling like slippers on tile. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. I called out, "Is anyone there?" My voice echoed, then faded. The elevator bell chimed again. I hurried back, but the doors closed before I could reach them. I took the stairs down, heart racing. When I reached the lobby, the elevator doors stood open, lights flickering, the interior empty. I finished my shift in the admissions office, too shaken to do another round. I watched the hallway outside, waiting for the sunrise. After that, the elevator became my enemy. Every night, it moved on its own, doors opening and closing, lights dancing in the dark. I stopped using it, stopped getting too close. But the sound of the bell haunted me. I started to see more faces in the windows, shapes moving through the halls, whispers on the edge of hearing. The building felt alive, watching me, waiting. Once, I found the elevator stopped at the basement, doors open. The darkness inside was absolute. I felt a cold wind blow up the shaft, carrying with it the faint scent of antiseptic and something rotten. I slammed the doors shut and ran. The supervisor didn't believe me. The police didn't care. "Nobody's in there but you," they said, but I knew better. On my last night, I arrived to find the elevator already moving, lights flickering, bell chiming. I walked the halls, every sense on edge. The shadows seemed deeper, the air colder. I passed the pediatric wing, saw a child's handprint smeared on the glass. In the surgical theater, I heard the clatter of instruments, though the room was empty. In the chapel, the candles were lit, though no one had been inside for years. I made my way to the lobby, heart pounding. The elevator doors stood open, the interior bathed in an unnatural light. I heard footsteps behind me, soft, hesitant. I turned, but saw only shadows. The elevator bell chimed again. I stepped inside, unable to resist. The doors closed, and the elevator began to descend. The lights flickered, then went out. The elevator stopped, the doors opened. I was in the basement. The hallway was pitch black, the air thick with the smell of mold and decay. I shined my flashlight, but the beam died after a few feet. I heard whispers, dozens of voices, overlapping, pleading, begging for help. I felt cold hands brush against my arms, pull at my clothes. I stumbled forward, desperate to find the stairs. I found the door, pushed it open, and ran up the steps, not stopping until I burst into the morning light outside. I quit that day, handed in my badge, and never looked back. But sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I hear the elevator bell chime, and I remember the feeling of cold hands reaching for me in the darkness, and I wonder if the hospital is really empty after all. Story 9. Security guard horror. The guard shack received calls from empty buildings. There's a certain kind of silence that hangs over industrial parks after dark. It's not the peaceful stillness you find in the woods or the soft hush of a sleeping neighborhood. This silence is heavier. It presses down, thick with the memory of daytime noise, forklifts, shouting foremen, the beep of reversing trucks. At night, all that remains is the echo. I was the night security guard at one of those places. Dozens of warehouses sprawled across cracked asphalt, each one a concrete box with a number stenciled above the door. The guard shack sat at the entrance, a little glass box with a heater that barely worked, a battered desk, and a landline phone mounted on the wall. My only company was the steady glow of the floodlights and the low hum of insects in the summer. My routine was simple. Every hour, I'd make a circuit of the property, checking the padlocks, rattling the gates, shining my flashlight into dark corners. The rest of the time, I'd sit in the shack, drink coffee, and watch the monitors. It was lonely, but I didn't mind. I'd grown used to being my own company. But then the calls started. It was a Tuesday night, just after midnight. I was halfway through a crossword puzzle when the phone rang. The sound startled me. I'd almost forgotten it was there. Most nights, it was silent, except for the occasional check-in from the supervisor or a lost trucker looking for directions. But this call was different. I picked up the receiver. "Security, this is Tom." Silence. For a moment, I thought the line had gone dead. Then I heard a faint crackle, like static, and the barest whisper of breathing. I waited, listening, but the sound faded, replaced by the quiet hum of the line. I hung up, frowning. 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. This time, I hesitated before picking up. "Security." Again, silence. Then, so faint I almost missed it, I heard my own name, Tom, spoken in a child's voice, high and trembling. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "Who is this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Do you need help?" No answer. The line went dead. I checked the call log. The call had come from Building 1-2, a warehouse that had been empty for years. The company that used to rent it went bankrupt, and the place had been sealed ever since. No power, no phones, no reason anyone should be inside. I radioed the supervisor, but got only static. I told myself it was a prank, maybe one of the day guards, bored and playing games. Still, I decided to check it out. I grabbed my flashlight and keys and drove the golf cart across the lot. The night was thick with fog, the shapes of the warehouses looming out of the darkness. Building 1-2 was at the far end, its windows boarded up, the loading dock padlocked. I parked, climbed out, and walked to the door. The lock was intact. I circled the building, shining my flashlight into every window, but saw nothing but dust and shadows. As I rounded the corner, I heard a faint ringing from inside, like a phone off the hook, the distant beep 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 of a disconnected line. I pressed my ear to the wall, but the sound faded. I stood there for a long moment, heart pounding, before heading back to the shack. I tried to shake it off, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that voice, my name, whispered in the dark. The calls continued, sometimes once a night, sometimes more. Each time the caller was silent, or whispered my name, or breathed into the receiver. Sometimes I heard crying, the soft, broken sobs of a child. Other times it was laughter, high and frantic, echoing through the line. I started to dread the sound of the phone. I unplugged it, but it would still ring, shrill and urgent, even when the cord was lying on the floor. I kept checking the call log. The calls always came from empty buildings, sometimes Building 1-2, sometimes Building 7, once from the old office trailer that had burned down years ago. I checked them all, but never found anyone inside. I told the supervisor. He shrugged it off. Probably crossed wires. These old places are full of glitches. But I knew better. One night, the phone rang, and when I picked up, I heard my own voice on the other end, repeating the words I'd spoken earlier. "Security, this is Tom." The line echoed, my voice distorted, looping back on itself. I slammed the receiver down, heart racing. After that, the calls grew stranger. Sometimes I'd hear distant sounds, footsteps echoing in empty hallways, doors slamming, the faint hum of machinery that hadn't worked in years. Once, I heard a woman's voice singing a lullaby, the melody warped and broken. I stopped sleeping. I started making my rounds every half hour, checking every door, every window, desperate for something real to hold on to. One night, I found the door to Building 1-2 ajar. The lock was broken, the chain dangling. I stepped inside, flashlight trembling in my hand. The air was thick with dust, the floor littered with debris. At the far end of the warehouse, an old rotary phone sat on a crate, the receiver off the hook. I picked it up, pressed it to my ear. Silence, then a voice, my voice whispered, "Help me." I dropped the phone and ran. After that, I refused to go near Building 1-2. I started seeing things in the corners of the monitors, shadows moving through empty rooms, faces pressed against dusty windows, eyes blinking in the darkness. The calls continued, each one more desperate than the last. One night, the phone rang, and when I answered, all I heard was static. Then, beneath the hiss, a chorus of voices, dozens, maybe hundreds, whispering my name. I unplugged the phone, smashed it against the desk, but the calls kept coming. On my last night, I sat in the shack, lights off, watching the monitors. The phone rang again and again, each time more insistent. I refused to answer. As dawn broke, the calls stopped. The silence returned, heavier than before. I quit that morning. I never went back, but even now, years later, I sometimes wake in the night, heart pounding, convinced I hear the phone ringing. Sometimes, when I answer, I hear my own voice, whispering from the darkness. And I wonder if the buildings are really empty, or if they're full of echoes, waiting for someone to listen. Word count for this story: approximately 300 words. Story 10. Security guard horror. My replacement had been dead for 3 days. Routine is everything on the night shift. You live by it. You clock in, do your rounds, check the doors, and count the hours until your relief walks through the door. For a lot of us, it's the only thing that keeps you from losing your mind alone in those echoing halls. And for years, I was the picture of routine. Same building, same rotation, same face greeting me in the fragile gray hour before dawn. I never thought about what would happen if that routine broke, until it did, in the worst way possible. The guy I rotated shifts with was named Eric. We weren't friends, not exactly, but we had a kind of understanding. You get close when you're the only two people who know what the building sounds like at 3 a.m. or how the pipes knock just before sunrise. We'd pass each other in the lobby, exchange a nod, maybe a quick joke if we were feeling social. And then one of us would disappear into the cold, silent morning. For weeks, maybe months, everything was the same. The same logbook, the same stiff office chair, the same flickering light above the security desk that nobody ever bothered to fix. Eric was always on time, never early, never late. He'd walk in with his thermos of coffee, looking half asleep, and I'd hand him the keys and head out into the dawn. Then, one morning, Eric didn't show. I waited 10-15 minutes longer than usual, pacing the lobby, watching the sky turn from black to bruised purple. I tried his cell, but it went straight to voicemail. The building was silent, the kind of silence that feels wrong, as if the walls themselves are listening. I told myself he was probably stuck in traffic or had slept through his alarm. Eventually, I locked up and left. The city was waking up, but I felt uneasy. I went home, showered, tried to sleep, but couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The next night, I arrived early, hoping to catch Eric before his shift ended. But when I walked in, the lobby was empty. The logbook hadn't been updated since my entry the previous morning. I checked the cameras, no sign of him. I looked through the building, calling his name, but there was no answer. His locker was untouched, the spare uniform still folded on the shelf. I called my supervisor. He sounded annoyed, as if I was bothering him over nothing. He probably swapped shifts with someone or called out sick and forgot to tell you. Just cover the shift and I'll sort it out. So I did, but as the hours dragged on, a sense of dread grew in my gut. The building felt different, colder, the darkness deeper. The usual noises, the creak of the elevator, the hum of the vending machine, the distant clang from the HVAC, seemed to fade. In their place was something else, a feeling of being watched, of not being alone. I made my rounds, flashlight in hand, checking every door and stairwell. The halls felt longer than usual. Shadows seemed to pool in the corners, refusing to move even when I swept the light over them. At one point, I heard footsteps echoing behind me in the stairwell. I spun around, but the stairs were empty. I called out, "Eric," but my voice vanished into the silence. I told myself I was being paranoid, but the feeling didn't go away. At dawn, I waited in the lobby for my replacement, but nobody came. I locked up and left, my nerves frayed. That afternoon, I got a call from my supervisor. His voice was strained. "Eric's not coming back. He was found in his apartment this morning. Apparently, he'd been dead for 3 days." The words didn't make sense. I'd seen Eric in the building just 2 days before, hadn't I? I remembered handing him the keys, seeing his tired face, hearing his muttered thanks. I'd watched him walk down the hall, heard the door close behind him. But according to the police, Eric had been dead in his bed that whole time. I felt sick. I barely slept that night, replaying every moment in my mind. Had I really seen Eric? Or had I just wanted to see him, clinging to routine in the face of exhaustion? I returned to work the next night, nerves raw. The building felt even emptier. The silence was thick, suffocating. Every time I turned a corner, I half expected to see Eric's face, pale and drawn, waiting for me in the shadows. As the hours passed, strange things started to happen. The logbook would open to entries I hadn't written, lines of neat handwriting in Eric's style, noting rounds at times when nobody was supposed to be there. The keys would move from the hook to the desk on their own. Once, I found the spare uniform draped over my chair, as if ready to be worn. The worst was the cameras. Late one night, I was watching the monitors when I saw someone walking the main hallway. A tall man in a security jacket, moving with Eric's stiff, tired gait. I radioed, thinking maybe someone had broken in, but there was only static. I ran to the hallway, but it was empty. When I checked the playback, the footage was hazy, the figure's face blurred, but I recognized the way he moved, the slump of his shoulders. It was Eric. The next night, the elevator arrived on my floor, doors opening with a ding. I stepped out into the hallway and saw Eric standing at the far end, half in shadow, watching me. I blinked and he was gone. After that, I started seeing him everywhere. In the reflection of the lobby glass, standing behind me. In the break room, just out of the corner of my eye. I'd hear his voice on the radio, faint and crackling, saying my name, asking if I'd made my rounds. I tried to tell myself it was stress, grief, the tricks a tired mind plays in the dark. But the evidence kept piling up. The logbook would be filled in with Eric's handwriting. The keys would be moved. Sometimes, I'd arrive to find the coffee pot still warm, though I knew nobody else had been there. One night, I got a call on the landline, no number, just static at first, then Eric's voice, low and tired, shifts over, go home. I hung up and sat in silence, heart pounding. I started to dread going to work, but I couldn't afford to quit. The job was all I had. On my last shift, the air was colder than ever. The lights flickered as I walked the halls. Every step felt heavy, as if the building itself was pushing back. I finished my rounds and went to the lobby, waiting for the dawn, praying for the sun. As I sat at the desk, the elevator dinged. The doors slid open. I looked up and saw Eric standing inside, eyes sunken, uniform wrinkled. He didn't speak, just stared at me with an expression I couldn't read. I stood, frozen. For a long moment, we looked at each other. Then he nodded just once and stepped out of the elevator. He walked past me down the hall and vanished around the corner. I never saw him again. I quit that morning. I left the keys on the desk, the logbook open to a blank page. I walked out into the sunlight, feeling the weight of the building lift from my shoulders. Sometimes I wonder if Eric ever really left. If his routine was so strong, so ingrained, that part of him stayed behind, walking the halls, checking the doors, waiting for his replacement. And sometimes, late at night, I wake to the sound of footsteps in my hallway, the jingle of keys, the soft murmur of a tired voice.